budget going to be?
Well, before we, so what he's going to spend it on, the rating agencies are looking over his shoulder because they're looking at the unsustainable expenditure trajectory. There's the election coming up, so of course governments tend to say, right, we need to be thinking of that, and that's understandably so. And the economy is actually quite weak. The growth is down, and that's why we say he's in a difficult spot, because the budget deficit is already very high, the tax base is already quite exhausted and tapped out, and yet the demands for expenditure are there. So what is he going to do? So what I look at it and say, how is he going to extract the revenues, and how is he going to apply them? Now, if it's a jobs and growth budget, which I believe is the national emergency, the national priority, is how he extracts it. He's going to actually need to diminish taxes on what are called the seeds, the capital formation side, the investment side, things like capital gains, etc., need to be diminished. Right, tax on interest, tax on dividends needs to be diminished, and tax on consumption, you know, the burden needs to shift to consumption. And then how do you apply it? It needs to shift not towards to consumption, but towards investment. Okay, now, when we look at last year's budget, last year's budget was sold to us as a job-creating budget. But when you look at capital gains tax was increased, tax on dividends was increased, and the expenditure was applied more to welfare projects than investment. And then you say that did exactly the opposite of what was said. And that's what we've got to be careful of.
But he's a politician. He has to spend on education, on...
They're doing that. We need to actually get the efficiency of expenditure. We've got too many one for the price of twos in this kind of in state expenditures.
All right. So we've talked about the ratings agencies. He has to sort them out. He has to find a way to stimulate trade, I guess. GDP at 2%. It has to grow. Otherwise, we're just not going to make it.
If we don't get growth going, the budget mustn't start a vicious spiral. We've got enormous problems in Europe, etc. We've got so many competitive advantages in terms of the tax level, tax complexity, etc. We mustn't just follow Europe in terms of what the political mistake is to promise more to the electorate than what the actual tax base can endure. That's the core of Europe's problem. And then, of course, to become a tax tyranny like France and Italy and Spain, where you can't do anything without the government actually taking something because they see themselves as more important than their citizens. We're not a tax tyranny. We need to actually say, this is a place to invest because we're not going to target you as a pot to plunder, as Europe is, etc. We need to do that.
Okay, final question. What's life going to be like for Joe Soap after this budget?
Well, we hope it's the minimal, the least disruption possible. Households are under enormous pressure at the moment. So the last thing we need is, tax hikes. If anything, we need to be looking at cutting personal taxes to facilitate savings. We need to embed savings in the household, because household savings are what's going to drive small, medium enterprises growth, which is where job creation takes place.
I have a feeling we're going to be borrowing more than saving, to be honest. Chris, we're going to have to leave it there, and I'm sure we'll chat again after the budget and see what he has said and analyse it all. But thanks so much for your preview.
My pleasure.